The night had draped itself across the world like a velvet curtain, soft and endless, pressing its silence onto the earth as though to remind everyone that there was magic hidden in stillness. Midnight had arrived, not with the clamor of clocks or the echo of voices, but with a quiet so profound that even the leaves in the garden seemed to pause in reverence. The moon, round and pale as polished silver, hung suspended in the sky, casting its ethereal light upon a balcony that overlooked the darkened stretch of the sleeping city. Evelyn stood there, her figure silhouetted against the glow, her slender hands gripping the wrought iron railing that felt cool beneath her skin. She had wrapped herself in a flowing white nightdress, its thin fabric whispering against her as the night breeze drifted past. Her long hair, dark as midnight itself, tumbled freely over her shoulders, catching the soft silver shimmer of moonlight like threads of starlight tangled in strands of silk. She was restless, though she could not name the storm within her chest. Her eyes, deep and searching, rose toward the constellations scattered across the heavens, as if they might arrange themselves into answers she had been too afraid to seek during the day. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 12, its lonely chime echoing faintly, though here on the balcony time felt arrested, as though eternity had curled into this single moment. Behind her, from within the house, came the faint sound of hesitant footsteps, each one measured, as though belonging to someone unsure if they had the right to break such stillness. She did not turn at once, she already knew who it was. Adrian. His presence carried a warmth that always preceded his words. A warmth she recognized even before his shadow joined hers on the balcony. He paused just a step away, his dark hair tousled by the night breeze, his eyes reflecting the faint light of the moon with a quiet intensity. For a long breath, he said nothing, as though standing beside her was enough, but when his voice finally emerged, it was barely louder than the rustle of the jasmine blossoms blooming along the garden walls below. "It's strange," he murmured, his tone threaded with thought, "how silence can feel louder than chaos." The words sank into her like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the layers of her guarded heart. Evelyn turned slightly, just enough for the moonlight to kiss her profile, her lashes lowered in shadow, her lips parted with the hint of an unspoken reply. The air between them hummed, alive with the tension of unsaid confessions, as though the night itself had become a stage for truths long withheld. In that fragile stillness, the world beyond ceased to matter. There was only the balcony, the silver moon above, and the two of them, bound by silence, yet on the cusp of words that could shatter or heal everything. Adrian's words lingered in the air like the echo of a forgotten melody, weaving themselves into the fabric of the midnight silence until Evelyn could no longer pretend she hadn't felt the truth beneath them. She drew in a slow breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of emotions she had carried in secret for far too long. Her lips parted as though to speak, but the words tangled in her throat, caught between fear and longing, between the safety of silence and the danger of honesty. Finally, her voice broke free, no louder than the whisper of the wind brushing past the balcony. "Silence," she said, her tone trembling as if it carried the ache of years, "has a way of reminding us of everything we tried to bury." She turned her eyes back to the stars as if afraid to meet his gaze, but she could feel him watching her, feel the intensity of his presence pressing against her like a tide she could neither resist nor escape. Her confession was small, but it cracked open the fragile wall she had built around her heart. Adrian stepped closer, and the space between them shrank into something so delicate it felt dangerous. His dark eyes, illuminated by the pale silver of the moon, held not judgment but an ache of his own, an ache so raw it mirrored her own hidden sorrow. He had been waiting, she realized, perhaps longer than she dared to admit, for a moment like this, a night when the silence between them could be broken without shattering the bond that still lived beneath it. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, though it trembled faintly with the weight of truth. "Then maybe it's time we stop burying them," he murmured. The words brushed against her like a hand reaching through shadows, gentle yet insistent, and Evelyn felt the ground beneath her heart shift. She looked away quickly, to the horizon where the night sky stretched endless and indifferent, but she could not escape the pounding rhythm inside her chest. It was too loud, too fierce, and for a fleeting second she wondered if he could hear it, if he could sense the war being waged within her. Memories rose unbidden, rushing like ghosts through her mind. She saw the laughter they had once shared beneath these very stars, the stolen glances that carried more meaning than words ever could, the promises whispered in hushed tones when the world seemed softer and love seemed simple. But she also saw the silence that followed, the distance that had grown between them like an ocean, swallowing everything they once were. Misunderstandings, pride, and fear had built walls high and cruel, walls she had convinced herself could never be scaled again. Her voice, when it returned, was quieter now, tinged with both hope and hesitation. "You make it sound simple," she whispered, almost pleading. "But every word we left unsaid became a brick, and I don't know if those walls can ever come down." For a long moment, Adrian did not answer. He stood beside her, letting the night hold them both in its tender silence, his profile etched in silver light. Then, slowly, with a courage that seemed born from the quiet itself, he lifted his hand. His fingers hovered near hers, hesitant, as though he feared she might pull away. Finally, he allowed his skin to brush against hers where it rested on the railing. The contact was feather-light, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. It sent a shiver coursing through her, a spark that she thought had long since died flickering suddenly back to life. "Maybe the walls don't have to fall all at once," he whispered, his tone steady despite the storm in his eyes. "Maybe they can crumble, piece by piece, if we're willing to try." Evelyn closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words, and in that fragile instant, beneath the soft blessing of the moon, she allowed herself to wonder if love, long thought buried, could still bloom again in the quiet language of midnight talks. The silence that followed was no longer empty, it pulsed with something alive, something neither of them had dared to name until now. Evelyn's fingers trembled faintly beneath Adrian's touch, though she made no effort to pull away. It was astonishing, she thought, how something as simple as the brush of skin against skin could feel more powerful than 1,000 words. Her heart raced, but beneath the thunder of its beat lay a gentleness, a yearning that wrapped itself around her like the cool breath of night. She let her eyes wander, unable to look at him directly, and found herself staring at the garden below. The jasmine vines that curled along the stone wall swayed in the breeze, releasing their fragrance into the midnight air. Each bloom, small and white, glowed softly in the silver moonlight, like fragments of the stars that had fallen to earth. She remembered how, years ago, Adrian had picked one of those blossoms for her, tucking it behind her ear as if it were a crown. The memory stung, sweet and bitter all at once, because it reminded her of what had been lost and of what still lingered. Adrian's voice broke into her thoughts, deep but uncertain, as though he feared the wrong word might shatter this fragile space they had carved out of silence. "Do you ever think," he asked softly, "that maybe we never stopped carrying each other, even when we tried to let go?" Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment she could not answer. His words were too close to the truth she had buried, too precise in naming the ache she had disguised as strength. She closed her eyes, willing herself to speak, but what came out was not the defiant denial she thought she could manage. Instead, her whisper betrayed her. "Every day," she admitted, her voice quivering like a candle flame. "Every single day." The confession hung between them like a fragile glass ornament, shimmering with both beauty and danger, and Evelyn wondered if it would fall and shatter or if it would be cherished, held gently, protected. Adrian turned then, facing her fully, and the moonlight caught in his eyes so that they gleamed with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Then why," he asked, his voice thick with emotion, "have we let silence win for so long?" Evelyn had no answer. She had asked herself the same question countless times, though she had buried it beneath excuses, beneath fear, beneath the belief that some things once broken could never be made whole again. Her lips parted, but the only sound that escaped was a soft sigh. She turned back to the horizon, where the edge of the world seemed swallowed by the velvet night. "Because silence felt safer," she said at last, her words slow, deliberate. "Because to speak was to risk everything. And I wasn't ready to lose you twice." Her honesty struck Adrian like a blow and a gift all at once. He stepped closer, until the faint space that remained between them seemed to dissolve entirely, and she felt his warmth enveloping her against the cool night air. "You never lost me," he said firmly, though his voice cracked with the force of his conviction. "I've been here all along, waiting for the moment you'd believe it again." He reached out then, bolder this time, his hand covering hers completely, grounding her trembling fingers with the steadiness of his own. Evelyn's pulse leapt beneath his touch, But for the first time in years, she did not retreat. Instead, she let herself lean into the quiet strength he offered, allowing the fragile thread of hope to weave itself through her doubts. Above them, the stars shimmered brighter, as if the universe itself leaned closer to witness the fragile rebirth of something it had long known was never truly gone. The night deepened around them, thick with the weight of all that had been left unsaid, yet softened by the fragile threads of hope beginning to weave between their words. Evelyn's breath came slow, deliberate, as though she feared the moment might collapse if she let herself feel too much at once. Adrian's hand remained firmly over hers, steady and unwavering, and though his touch was simple, it carried the gravity of years of longing, regret, and a love that had refused to die even when silence threatened to bury it. The balcony seemed smaller now, the world narrowing until there was only the two of them, wrapped in the pale glow of moonlight and the perfume of jasmine. For the first time in so long, Evelyn allowed herself to meet his gaze fully. What she found there was not just the man she remembered, but the man he had become older, perhaps a little wearier, but still carrying that same quiet fire she had once fallen in love with. His eyes held no accusation, no bitterness, only the ache of time wasted and the hope of time reclaimed. "I was afraid," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling but unbroken. "Afraid that if I tried again, I would find the same silence, the same distance, and I wouldn't survive it a second time." The words poured out of her, fragile but unstoppable, like a dam that had finally given way. "So I told myself it was better to hold the memories, even if they hurt, than to risk losing you completely. I thought I was protecting myself." Her confession rang through the air, vulnerable and raw, and for a moment she feared he would recoil, that he would tell her she had been selfish or cowardly. But Adrian did not flinch. Instead, his expression softened, and his thumb brushed against the back of her hand in a gesture so tender it unraveled her defenses all over again. "You don't have to protect yourself from me," he said quietly, his tone steady and sure. "Not now. Not ever. I know I failed you once, by letting pride and silence grow larger than us. But I've carried you in every breath, in every step, as if letting go was never really an option. I thought about reaching out 1,000 times, but every time I convinced myself you deserved better than a man who didn't fight hard enough the first time." His words struck her with both comfort and sorrow, because they revealed the truth she had always suspected. They had both been prisoners of the same fear, both too afraid to risk rejection while drowning in the very emptiness that fear had created. The breeze stirred again, carrying with it the cool night air and the sweet fragrance of the flowers, and Evelyn felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She did not look away this time. "Then maybe we both made the same mistake," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Maybe we both thought silence was safer, when really, it was what hurt us most." A tear slipped down her cheek, shimmering in the moonlight, and Adrian, without hesitation, reached up to gently brush it away. His touch lingered against her skin, warm and grounding, and for the first time in years she leaned into it, closing her eyes as though surrendering to something she had long denied. "Then let's not waste another night," Adrian murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's not let silence win again." His words hung between them like a vow, simple but powerful, and Evelyn felt her heart clench at the possibility they carried. For so long she had convinced herself that love, once broken, could not be restored. But here, beneath the glow of the moon, with Adrian's hand cradling hers and his voice anchoring her trembling spirit, she began to wonder if love was not something fragile at all. Perhaps it was enduring, waiting patiently for the moment two hearts were brave enough to claim it again. The world around them seemed to dissolve into nothingness, leaving only the balcony, the moon, and the fragile, luminous thread binding their hearts together. Evelyn's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, every inhale pulling in the cool perfume of jasmine, every exhale trembling with the weight of a love too long restrained. Adrian's hand still cradled hers, firm yet gentle, a touch that spoke of promises unbroken and battles yet to be fought. For a moment neither of them spoke, content to let silence transform from the enemy it had once been into something sacred, a vessel for truths that did not need words. The city below slept unaware, but here, in this small sanctuary of moonlight, love stirred, alive and urgent. Evelyn turned fully to him now, her eyes shimmering with tears that reflected both sorrow and hope, and she realized how much of her soul had been waiting aching for this very moment. "I don't want to lose this again," she whispered, her voice so fragile it seemed it might shatter against the night air. Her words carried the weight of years, of regrets too heavy to hold any longer. If we try, if we fall again, I don't think I'd survive it. Adrian's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, erasing the final distance between them until their breath mingled in the cool night air. Then we don't fall, he said firmly, conviction laced into every syllable. We fight. For us. For everything silence tried to take away. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise I won't let go this time, not for fear, not for pride, not for anything. His voice cracked with the strength of his own vulnerability, and Evelyn felt her resolve tremble under the power of his sincerity. Her heart thundered, but the fear that had once dominated her thoughts no longer felt like a prison, it felt like a threshold. She took a trembling step forward, until she stood so close she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Her fingers slipped from beneath his only to rise and press against his chest, where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her touch. That heartbeat, strong and certain, seemed to echo against her own, weaving them into a harmony no silence could ever erase. Then let's fight, she breathed, her voice a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. Let's not let silence steal another moment. Adrian exhaled sharply, relief and emotion colliding in the curve of his lips as he lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears. Slowly, cautiously, as though reverence demanded patience, he leaned forward. The world seemed to pause, the stars holding their breath, the night waiting for their decision. And then, finally, their lips met, soft at first, almost hesitant, but growing with the certainty of all they had longed to say but never dared. It was not the kiss of strangers finding something new, it was the kiss of two souls rediscovering what they had always known, reclaiming what time and silence had tried to bury. It was tender, fierce, and unbreakable, a vow written not in words but in the language of touch and breath and heartbeats. When they parted, the night had changed. It no longer felt heavy with silence but alive with possibility. Evelyn rested her forehead against his, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I think, she whispered, her voice steady now, that midnight will never feel the same again. Adrian smiled back, his fingers tangled with hers, and together they stood beneath the moon's quiet blessing, two hearts once broken but now beating in unison. The stars above glittered brighter, as if bearing witness to the truth they had finally spoken, not through words, but through love that had survived the cruelty of silence and emerged stronger in its wake.